Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start by generating a positive motivation for our time, recognizing the purpose of our coming together is to understand more deeply the Buddha's teachings, the way in which those teachings are organized and explained in the Lamrim, stages of the path to enlightenment. As Lama Zopa says, the most important thing that we can try to accomplish in our life is getting Lamrim realization, actually deeply understanding the Buddha's teachings through the three wisdoms, the wisdom of listening, the wisdom of contemplating, and the wisdom of meditating. So we generate minds of faith, efficacy, the power of the Buddha's teachings, mind of refuge in the origin of the teachings, being non-deceptive, being completely reliable. The mind of bodhicitta, wishing to actualize the Buddha's teachings in order to be of the greatest benefit to sentient beings. So we generate these minds of faith and refuge in bodhicitta. All right, so we're on day 272. Any thoughts or questions, material that we've covered? We're in the section on the 12 links of dependent origination, and we've covered ignorance and karmic formation, or just karma, and consciousness, the consciousness of the incarnation, the particular incarnation that we are thrown into on the under the power of karma, which is in turn itself generated under the power of ignorance and therefore the other afflictions. So after consciousness, the six sense bases develop, sometimes translated also as the six sense powers. So it's a really interesting teaching, I think, this particular, the teaching on the six sense powers. I'll share the image from the Wheel of Life that's on this topic. So again, the oar, the boat, the boatsman with the oar is consciousness, and now here, this house with the windows, the open, well, the glass, the windows, is the representation of the six sense bases or powers. So the quotation from Lama Zopa Rinpoche is, everything we encounter is experienced through the six sense bases. And then it says name and form. Oh, sorry, I skipped when I was recapping. I skipped name and form, which is generated by consciousness, name and form. So it says name and form generate the 6 sense bases, which again is symbolized by an empty house with 6 openings, usually shown as 5 windows and 1 door. From a distance, the house looks fully occupied, but it is empty, it says. Similarly, the 6 sense bases are meaningless without an object. So again, if we go back to, the Buddhist model of the mind that we may have encountered in Buddhism in a nutshell, or, other introductory classes that we've taken, the mind as a whole is comprised of the 6 sense powers, the 5 physical sense powers, and then the mental sense power. And that is how any sentient being becomes aware of any object of knowledge. Any object of awareness is going to be an engagement with one or more of the 6 sense powers, and the object being cognized. So we can't really talk in any kind of way about, the eye sense power, the ear sense power, the mental, if there's not something being cognized, if there isn't something to be seen, to be heard, to be thought of, remembered, imagined, what have you. There's this necessary interdependent relationship between objects of awareness and the sense power, one or more of the sense powers that is engaging with objects of awareness. So when I was saying that it's a really interesting teaching, particularly because, it's a very old teaching, and I don't know if it's probably traceable to a sutra, would be my guess. The topic as a whole, and so what's interesting is that there's this really very scientific distinction that's made between the organ, the eye organ, the ear organ, the taste, the tongue organ, etc., the gross organ, and then the subtle sense power that it allows for that allows for the subjective experience of that way of engaging with the world. And that's something, really that probably modern science didn't have, was a distinction that really wasn't made, in modern science, probably up until maybe the last, I don't know, couple of 100 years, at least, where they talk about this subtle, power of the eye consciousness. So it isn't, that they distinguish, the difference between the eye itself and the eye sense power, which is described as a subtle energy, that enables how we subjectively see things, which is different than the eye organ. So they, of course, even go so far in the low rig teachings to distinguish between like a disease of the eyeball and the way in which the disease of the eyeball might influence the subjective experience of sight. So, they would, of course, talk about injuries to the eye, or, like a dark spot that, a partial blindness or something, and how that then impacts the subtle energy that for someone else, wouldn't be impacted by that, but it goes through this process of being transmitted by, impacted by or transmitted by this subtle sense power. And so, and that you can have it can go in the other, it can go in reverse as well. You can have a perfectly functional eye, but under the influence of hallucination or a substance or an illness like a fever, the subtle power that animates the eye can be impacted, even though there isn't anything wrong with the physical structure of the eyeball. So they understand how there's this interdependent relationship between the organ and then this subtle energy. And of course, modern science, and it's hard to say, modern science would say, well, certainly there are electrochemical processes that are necessary that go, there's signaling and so on, and pathways that could be what Buddhism is talking about. They don't talk in that kind of way because, this is 2,000-year-old ways of speaking, but they talk about this sort of energetic pathway that is distinct from the structures of the sensory organs, that is what actually allows the mind to subjectively experience sight or sound or taste or touch. And then also, of course, you have the mental sense power, which remembers or imagines or judges or discriminates, uh, you know, yeah, different functions of the mental sense power, and oftentimes is connected to, discriminating or judging a sensory perception into pleasant or unpleasant, or salty or sweet, or and therefore, I'm in the mood for, I just had something salty, and now the mental sense power is saying, well, I would prefer now to have something sweet, and then there's a sensation of pleasure. Or if you're looking around and you can't find, you ran out, or then the mental sense power is there's gonna be a frustration might arise in the mind, or a sense of restlessness might arise in the mind. So the mental sense power is acting independently of the sensory powers sometimes, but also acting to judge or discriminate different kinds of sensory data also, making judgments or having views about what the sensory data is, whether we want to be hotter or colder, or we want to be experiencing this kind of music or that kind of music, or what kind of, do we want Thai food, or do we want Mexican, or all kinds of ways of relating from the mental sense power to the physical sensory powers. So I've always found that, because it's such an ancient teaching, to have that kind of scientific kind of exactness, I think is probably, it seems to me, something that wasn't common in Western ways of distinguishing it back, when, in terms of 2,600 years ago. That kind of precision, I think, is really interesting. Okay. So yeah, day 273 again is really just going, what we've already said, that on the basis of the six sense powers, you have contact with objects. And I believe so that's symbolized as a man and woman embracing. But yeah, that's the mental, or that's the image, is a man and woman embracing, is the representation in the wheel of life for contact. But, I mean, it could be anything, it's because it refers to, we're of course, we're engaging with sensory objects every moment of every day. So it says, there are 6 types of contact, one for each of the 5 sense bases and one for the mental sense base. The definition of contact is one of the 6 sense bases of the deluded consciousness meeting and experiencing the object through its own capacity. Contact is the necessary link between having a sense base that can apprehend an object and developing a feeling about that object. The term contact does not refer to the physical contact of the gross sense organ with the external object. It is easy to see that the eyeball does not actually need to touch the object, but neither does the tongue tasting food constitute contact. What is being referred to here is the sense consciousness connecting with the object based on this physical contact. For example, a hot pan might touch the skin, but the link of contact is created when the mind registered this physical event. This will then lead to the link of feeling, which in that case would be unpleasant. So, and then, Lama Zopa goes on to say that basically any time we engage in any act of that kind of perception, we're going to follow that up with the mental sense consciousness, labeling that experience as pleasant, unpleasant, and sometimes neutral, but generally mostly pleasant or unpleasant. We're going to develop attachment. We're going to develop aversion based on and here it says based on past karma. So past karma can be sort of cultural familiarity. Some cultures have certain food ingredients that are more common, so maybe your whole life you would gravitate, or even just within your own family, the way that your parents cook, what they choose to expose their children to, what kind of patterns are there, can shape what you find pleasant and unpleasant for the rest of your life, or for long periods of time, until maybe you start to experiment and branch out into other things. But you can have these patterns, and of course karma is also, we have sort of built-in mechanisms for sour and bitter, and that's just based on being human, and how common it is for sweet things to be a source of beneficial calories, and how common it is for bitter things, or the sense of smell being directly related to things being rotten, and so on. So they're very protective, and that's also karma, because we've become human, and so we we've inherited certain ways of relating to the environment that are protective, by moving things. And then of course, in our environment, we have this tendency now to go to hyper palatable things, which sort of hijacks that system, and so we lose sense of a normal level of sweet and so on, because we can become accustomed to an artificial, but there is a natural system that's trying to kind of keep us safe and in balance, but it's using millions of years of evolution that science can now kind of overcome. But okay. And then, yeah, so I mean, this is all just sort of one idea that's elaborated over the course of a couple contemplations, because day 274 is again that feeling. So feeling is the next of these 12 links. So we've actually gone through a couple. We started with, again, before class, name and form was where we, ended up in, and then name and form gives rise to the 6 sense bases, and then the 6 sense bases gives rise just to contact, the ability to see things, hear things, taste things, touch things, think about things, etc. The ability to have subjective experiences mediated by the sense powers. And then from contact comes feeling. So it's important, again, going back to the sort of model of the mind, it's important to be precise about the order of the dominoes that are all falling. They're experienced kind of as one thing. You wake up and you're seeing something, and then you have some judgment about it, and then feelings arise. So for us, in the moment, or someone says something, when someone says an unkind thing, we're just hearing, all that's happening is that their vocal cords are creating waves of compressed molecules of gas, and that's literally hitting the gross ear organ. And then, of course, then that subtle sense power is taking over and translating that into what we interpret as sound. But then the mind is thinking, oh, well, how dare they say that to me? That's not, this is not acceptable. And then we feel averse to that, and we engage in karma on the basis of feeling aversion to that. So, subjectively, when we're caught up in it, it kind of just feels like one thing happened all at once. But it's important to unpack and recognize that, you actually have all of these discrete steps that are happening one after the other after the other. So contact, from contact comes feeling, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And so it's contact is the man with an arrow in his eye, which seems kind of extreme. But this is here, I guess. It's hard to see, but I guess he has a outstretched hand, and then this white kind of V shape, I guess, is meant to be the arrow that's in his eye. And I guess his eye maybe looks kind of injured, I suppose. But it's not, it's very zoomed in, so it's hard to. Yeah, so it could be, again, contact generates feeling or sensation, which is symbolized by a man with an arrow in his eye, who is suffering because of his contact with an object. Without contact, there is no feeling. There are 3 kinds of feeling, again: pleasurable, painful, and neutral, which can also be seen, it says, as happiness, suffering, and indifference. Pleasurable feelings give rise to attachment, painful feelings give rise to aversion and hatred, and neutral feelings give rise to apathy and ignorance. The object with which the consciousness makes contact is not inherently beautiful, ugly, or boring, or inherently good, bad, or neutral, it says. It is the mind that makes it so. As we have seen, everything comes from the mind. Because again, we know that no 2 people ever experience the same piece of art or the same piece of music or the same food in exactly the same ways, and we don't even experience those things in exactly the same way every single day. Some days we're in a mood for a particular kind of object, and we would find that more pleasurable on that particular day. Other days, maybe we've been doing that for a while, and so it's, for us at that particular moment, it's kind of an object of aversion, where it comes on the radio, the song comes out, and we're like, no, not again, not this song. But then a few months later, we're like, oh, I haven't listened to this in a while, and so then it becomes an object of attachment. So it's all just a projection from the mind. None of it is there in the object, even though, again, for us, it feels like it's all happening at once. It feels like even the judgment of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral is there in the object, and we're just noticing it. Even though we can demonstrate that we don't notice it in the same way over time, still, even if we notice it differently on different days, both days, we feel like it's still there in the object. And even though we recognize, we'll even argue with someone who says, oh, that's a terrible book, or that's, how could you eat that? That's gross. And I'll be like, no, this is amazing. But it's really just because maybe we grew up with that and they grew up with something else, or we happen to like science fiction and they happen to like historical fiction, or they happen to like biographies, and we couldn't imagine reading like a 500-page biography on Lincoln, but that's, for them, like they'll spend their whole weekend, doing that, because that's an object of attachment for them, and it's an object of aversion for us. For me, that would be like a punishment, like go to your room, and but for other people, like that's what they get excited about. And some people, they collect things and they go to conventions, and so it's just, people are different, they have different karmic propensities, but it's all just arising from the karma of the individual. Okay, so we'll pause. Those were all just sort of kind of one connected idea, so I wanted to just go through them. Thoughts or questions?
I think I'm a little bit confused, so my question might be confusing. Like, feelings sound kind of like we're attaching some judgment. It's like we've experienced something, and at that moment we're deciding almost like what to do with it. Like, oh, this is bad, this is good, or it doesn't matter. I can't be bothered with it. Are those feelings kind of like karmic seeds as well? Okay.
Yeah, so the sense powers, the eye, the nose, and so on, they have a pretty narrow, range of what they can discriminate, what they can. And then everything else, like when you look at an object, your eye sense consciousness is really just discriminating what they would say is shape and color. If it's not, I've always wondered if they say that the eye sense power also cognizes movement. I've never heard. They always say shape and color, and they never say movement. But I've always wondered, like, is that happening in the mental sense? Like, does Buddhism actually have a teaching that says that the mental sense power is like stitching together discrete moments of, because that's kind of what movement, I mean, the perspective of movement is, it's just sort of like these frames that are perceived as continuous. So I've just never, but I've never, the teaching generally is that the eye consciousness cognizes shape and color. So if we see a a computer on the desk, the eye sense power is just giving us, well, it has this dimension and it's this high and it's slate gray, and that's it. And then the mind is like, these are all of the things I can do with it. This is, it's fast. Maybe it's a status symbol because it was expensive. I enjoy taking it here and there. I have a lot of memories associated with being able to use it in various ways. So I have all kinds of emotions and thoughts about it, and that's all just happening in the mind. And certainly, those are imprints as they're happening. Those are imprints that are shaping our continued relationship with that, because we could choose, of course, it's all happening kind of unconsciously, it's just sort of automatic. Like, oh, this is frustrating me. Like my experience with this thing has been generally positive, so I see it and I kind of feel happy that it's still, or my experience of this has been disappointing or frustrating. And so when I see it, though, that, and of course, however it is that we're reacting, that is, those are further coloring how we're probably going to interact with it tomorrow. Like, in that moment, if that was what was arising, that feeling of frustration or that feeling of, the next time we see it, we've made it more likely that frustration or pleasure or whatnot is going to be also what happens then. If we learn to think about it, if we learn to bring to mind a more holistic, instead of just, if we train the mind, basically, if we notice, oh, I have a tendency to focus on just these particular attributes, and I don't focus on these other attributes. I have a kind of a distorted view that's not realistic. If we train the mind to notice that, and we intentionally cause ourselves to think about that object in a more holistic way, or think about it in terms of, yes, this is beneficial. But I'm, still, like, the purpose of my life is my spiritual practice. This is something that I find supports that, in either, because, like, like a set of kitchen tools. Some people get really excited about their pots and pans, and they get the best. They have to have the right kind of brand, and if it gets stained, then they throw it out. And so every time they see it, they're like, oh, that's a status symbol. That's it's the best kind, and it's the right color, and it matches my cabinets. And when people come over, I want to take them on a tour of my kitchen so they see that my cabinets match my pots and pans, and then they'll think that I've got it together, and I've made it. And so they tell themselves all of these stories about their pots and pans, that they could otherwise not tell themselves. They could just be like, this is keeping me alive, and I want to continue to be alive in order to practice. So I need to have, a pot and a pan and a skillet, and so that I can make food, so that I don't die, so that I can continue to practice. So, and you can change that. You can go from one to the other. You can train the mind to have different ways of spontaneously relating to the things that you observe. So of course, the actual actions that we subsequently engage in on the basis of feeling, that's even going to be a deeper karmic imprint. If we if we get angry when something that we like gets scratched, or we have a sense of pride that arises. So I mean, there's further karmic actions that flow from feeling itself, from the initial discrimination of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Further stories, further actions of body, speech, and mind, that are going to flow from that. But the moment of feeling arising, of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, like he said, there's it inevitably we move into attachment, we move into aversion, or we move into apathy and ignorance. And then on the basis of attachment, aversion, or ignorance, we'll make a whole range of further actions. And all of that is going to be, imprinted to one degree. So then there's a question in the chat. How do we have patience? So the question, I think, is it about noticing and kind of being disappointed in ourselves when we notice that we were motivated solely to engage in objects because we enjoy, because we find them pleasurable, and that, like, oh, I could have done something more meaningful with my time, or like I got noticing that we got caught up in attachment or aversion and feeling like we should have known better. Is that kind of the question?
Hey, Venerable. Yeah, it's basically I was spending time. I had like a drama teacher, but she's not like an ordained nun or anything. But I was studying Lamrim with her, and she's also a doctor. But as of like 2 months ago, I was staying with her, but then I left. I think just because of like my impatience. But so now I'm kind of living life, and I think every time when I have a kind of pleasure-based motivation or selfish motivation, I think of how I could be doing better or like something like this. But it kind of has been, I think, kind of crazy, almost like practicing too strongly, or basically even being impatient about the practice. I think like I need to be at the most benefit as quickly as possible, and it kind of makes me go a little crazy. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah. I mean, I think, it's certainly true that we have to strike a balance between striving and then having an unrealistic time frame, thinking, and, of course, Buddhism is presenting us with these, all of these incredible aspirations, but we also have to realize that, they also say it's going to take, on the bodhisattva path, it would take 3 countless great eons, right? I mean, the Buddha trained his mind for 3 countless great eons, the time that it takes for a universe to abide, to be created, to abide, and to dissolve, three times over. So, trillions and trillions of years, of fortunate lifetimes, of training that, that he had to progress through. So there's also, of course, they say we want to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, and we want to, but at the same time, it's also true that these models that were given were people, for the most part, where it took a very long time. So, we do need to have this long-term perspective, and not have an artificial time frame. And then, of course, it's also true that we need a certain level of accountability, sort of that middle, the middle way that the Buddha talked about, not just completely going into total laziness and, not trying to make any effort, but then also not going into austerity, not going into self-deprivation, not, so taking care of the body, sleeping enough, eating enough, having a balance of, activities, things like, oh, I'd like to be out in nature, so you just, you do that, and, or, oh, I would like to, so really, I think it's mainly about how, not thinking about like these are good actions. Well, I mean, to some degree, of course, there are some things that, of course, we should avoid, the actual negativities, killing, stealing, so on. But for for the most part, I think Tibetan Buddhism is also very skillful in encouraging us to think about transforming our day-to-day experiences. And so not thinking, well, only meditating, only studying, that's the only thing that's of any benefit. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm being lazy. And then because we can think, well, I'm going to work to be of benefit to sentient beings. And then every person that we interact with, we try to think, I'm trying to be of benefit to this sentient being that's in front of me right now. And how whatever they're saying, whatever's happening, whether they're just the cashier, where we're getting our lunch, or, whatever it is, how do I be of benefit to this sentient being that's in front of me right now? How do I speak in a way that they're going to be benefited by? How do I show concern, for them in a way where they're going to feel supported and benefited by having interacted, with me in that way at that time. And so it isn't about, those are the normal kinds of interactions that we would otherwise be having. But we're just doing it with a particular motivation to practice, as you're saying, to bring what we have learned in. So in that way, kind of, to even further get away from trying to distinguish between, okay, well, this is the time that I'm practicing, and then this is the time that I'm not practicing. We should try to get excited about being able to interact with, with other people, even if it's just driving somewhere or going to the grocery store and buy, because it gives us an opportunity to put into practice what we've been studying, what we've been meditating on, the kinds of things that, and so thinking of it like, having a playful kind of attitude about it, like, how do I, when I'm getting in my car to drive to work, like, can I make a plan for, like, this is what I'm going to try to, today on this Monday, I'm going to take this particular teaching on patience, or this particular, line that I read, this quotation that I read, last night, and what can I learn from that, and how can I use that during this particular interaction with, with other sentient beings on the road to work. And so, if we do that, then it doesn't matter what we're doing. It doesn't matter if we've accepted, again, within reason, there are limits. We've said that. But if I get invited, if you get invited to go to a party, or, you get invited to go to a movie, then you don't think, well, no, I can't go because that's a waste of my time and it's not productive. No, you think that's an extraordinary opportunity to develop, relationships with other people, to put into practice the kinds of things that I've been learning, to see how that goes. Like, what didn't go so well, what can I do better on next time, what's coming up for me in that experiment of, like, how things went, and then also, there's going to be times when we feel like we need to when we do really need to take a break, and we think, I am taking a break for the benefit of sentient beings, because it's just right now, that's what, I can see that I'm kind of getting frazzled, or, and so I'm going to just maybe take some alone time, or I'm going to take a nap, or I am going to watch like a silly movie or whatever, because I'm going to do that to kind of recharge myself. And then, of course, over time, we can find more and more constructive things, we can kind of, maybe move away from violent, movies, or, and maybe, so gradually we try to find other things, because not everything that we consume is necessarily, beneficial. If it's just a, a movie or a TV show or something where there's not other people involved, then we can work with that over time. But yeah, so I think it's certainly about really trying to intentionally have this long-term view, and um, and then just be honest with yourself in terms of, am I trying? Am I not trying? If I am trying, then great. That's really all I can do. I woke up and I tried, and that's good enough. And I'm trying not by being so hard on myself about, only these are the right activities and these are bad activities, but I'm transforming as much as I can of my day and bringing it into the path, and then seeing it as something that's helping me. But
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just I think I could be. I think I mean, it's like it's not reasonable, I think, to think that because I'm to practice to the point to where I'm having a panic attack, like I'm not really helping people by having a panic attack, I guess, is one way to look at it. But another way is, my teacher, honestly, I have regret because I think she was an amazing practitioner. Like she was incredibly talented. Not that she died, but so I should say she is incredibly talented and patient, but she's also a doctor too. So I feel like like a Ayurvedic and Chinese medical doctor, and I feel like if I was with her, I could be benefiting more people. The reason why I left was because um, I was staying with her, but it was kind of a close knit thing, and I couldn't really keep up with the practice. I was just really impatient. I felt like I had to get out of there. Um, so I don't know if I'm kind of like revealing too much or something like this, but yeah, I'm just trying to find that sweet spot now, having left that situation of like trying to practice but not going crazy at the same time. Because I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
yeah, so I mean, I think it could be a time, when you say, well, I am taking a break, for the benefit of others, and giving yourself more spaciousness, and then not feeling guilty about it, because I mean, it could be that some like lung, maybe developed, kind of like that's very common when people kind of push, for a time, they can develop kind of a disordered, energetic, system. Um, and so, and that really can require, kind of just, not, really not meditating, or, for a time, and getting out into nature, and, just kind of, so I mean, that's the kind of a thing where you'd want to maybe try to talk to more, a teacher, a more advanced, um, kind of a guru kind of a thing, to kind of get a sense of, maybe, is that, what's happening. But lung isn't uncommon, and it, really can. So then you would just think, well, the best thing for me, in order, I'm not of any benefit to sentient beings, if I can't kind of go in a step-by-step way, and just sort of make incremental, um, progress. If I have this view that it's like all or nothing, or, um, and then that's kind of causing, these, things to arise, then that's certainly not overall productive. So so then you would, it really would be that, in order to be of benefit for sentient beings, I would have to, just really scale back on what seems like, and so again, that would mean like just picking a couple, like maybe just like one thing, every day, like, just and think, okay, I'm just gonna work on just this. I'm not gonna like try to think about, oh, I have to do 6 different kinds of meditation, or I have to think about, this and this, and I'm just gonna work on just one kind of motivation, or one, I'm going to think about just patience, for like a month, and I'm not going to think about generosity and also ethic. I'm just going to think about one thing, and I'm just going to try to make some progress on one thing.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I think I might even just like reach out to her too and just kind of get her input, because I did take her as my teacher for like such a long time, and I think I just had this habit of I would get too close and then I would leave. But at the same time, I mean, you can't really, it's difficult to manage the spiritual path by yourself. I mean, I think teacher is like necessary. I mean, and I read in the text too that the guru is really like the heart of the path, so it's kind of difficult to like navigate it on your own, I would say.
Okay. So, so that was the section on the 6 sense bases and their consequences. Any other thoughts or questions?
Venerable, I can save it for Thursday if you like. I'm just curious if you can explain a little bit about the connection between a neutral feeling and ignorance. I'm not quite clear on that, but if you want to wait, that's fine.
So with attachment and aversion, we are kind of relating very strongly to the object. Either we're moving toward it very strongly, or we're moving away from it very strongly, and that's so we're engaging in a deep way, either again moving toward or moving away, but there's interest in the object. The object is either something that is strongly positive and we need to possess, or it's strongly negative and we need to be separated from it. So, but at least there's a lot of engagement. If it seems neutral, then there isn't really any engagement. Then it's just sort of there. It's just sort of in the background. It doesn't foster curiosity. It doesn't. And so, I mean, I think critically, strangers can be neutral. We can put whole heaps of sentient beings into neutral, in terms of, well, they haven't done anything for me, and so I don't really care if they're around me. They also haven't, they haven't benefited me in any way. So I'm not really making an effort to spend time with them or keep them around. But they also haven't hurt me in any, they've never said anything rude. They're not disrespectful. And so I also, like, if they are generally around, that's okay. But we're not then motivated to think of them like as a real person, as a whole, like their aspirations, their hopes, their fears, their anxieties, their the ways in which they are a full functioning sentient being. If we're relating to them kind of through this lens of, well, they haven't, I just don't really care. Like, yeah, if they're there, that's, fine. They're just sort of a lamppost, in the background. We don't really distinguish all of the people that we pass on the street and in the other cars and, you know, at the grocery store, they're just, we think about them only if they're in our way, or they do say something, like they compliment us, then we feel warmly. Or if, you know, they cut in front of us, then we feel not so warmly. But if they're not doing any of that, if they're just sort of across the room, then it's just sort of neutral for us. And so that kind of neutrality is sort of a dullness, you know. It's sort of a dull mind. It's a lack of engagement, and that's what is gonna, so there's no kind of wisdom being brought to bear. The mind isn't moving toward them at all. It's just kind of like, yeah, they're not really distinguishable from the wallpaper that they're standing in front of. So there's no interest, there's no wisdom, there's no engagement, there's no thought about, this is a suffering sentient being that I should be working to benefit. We have that thought mainly toward the people that are nice to us, mainly toward the people that are, you know, kind to us. So, and of course, again, all of this with training, you know, we can come to see it all differently and move in a different direction. But to the extent that things seem neutral, you know, and you know, the same is true even with you know, inanimate objects. So of course, objects can just mean that which is cognized by the mind, and so it could be a person, etc. But again, with inanimate objects that don't spark any kind of engagement, we then don't think about their nature. We don't think, you know, we're not really motivated to, like, we can see how objects of attachment and objects of aversion can cause suffering. And so on the basis of that, we might really try to investigate them, and we might try to see how we are exaggerating. We can see clearly how, well, with time, with effort, we can see how we exaggerate objects of attachment, and we exaggerate objects of aversion, and how that causes us to suffer. And if we decide we don't want to suffer, then we might get really interested in unpacking that. But even if we're doing that, we're only doing it toward objects of attachment and objects of aversion. We're still leaving out objects that just seem kind of neutral. So again, that's reinforcing the tendency that we have to not think critically, to not engage, to not bring our wisdom to bear. And so it's sort of energizing the habit, the tendency, the habit pattern of a dull, unengaged, uncritical, unanalytical mind. Whereas that's not what we want. We want a very sharp, analytical, wisdom mind to be active as much as possible. We want to bring that to bear as much as we possibly can.
Thank you. Might have to go over it a little bit more next time. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so we'll leave it there for today. So we'll just end with dedication. So bring to mind our altruistic intention, and think that by having listened and contemplated, we've actualized that intention, which has created positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in a beneficial way. So we specifically bring to mind a spiritually supportive, beneficial, ripening result that we wish to bring to fruition on the basis of that positive energy. So on your own, in whatever way is most valid for you, try to think of offering your practice and the fruit of your practice in that spiritually significant way. All right. We will meet again on Thursday. And Yeah.
Thanks very much, Venerable.
Yeah, thank you, Venerable.
have a good night.
Have a
You
good
too.
night.
You too.